I keep thinking, I have to do something about it because we're just all over the place.
And you never know. I mean, he had that bike accident 8 years ago. He couldn't do it.
Yeah, I know. I keep thinking, oh, but yeah.
Everything's set up.
We lost several friends.
Stick around for a little bit.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anything.
That's set up, don't worry about it.
Of course, too, but, you know, you don't know what you
didn't bring my
It's not as,
chance, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just have an old.
Okay.
I'm just gonna talk to you about the.
Exactly, exactly. This is like in the basement. Whoops.
I understand,
Yeah.
that we can actually use this.
Did you guys read Donna's?
You know, I read it, and but you
Yeah,
printed
I
it.
was,
Well,
right.
I thought
And
so,
I was
just to
also
share.
thinking,
Yeah.
She was thoughtful
Yeah,
enough to
probably
put
not.
together
got the price
about, well, just
but
what was
Yeah.
happening
we were
tonight.
thinking
Yeah.
about
What
having
are we
yeah,
doing in
check
October?
more
Oh, okay.
professional
Who's gonna do
projector.
things next year?
The one that goes.
Right, so that
I've
would
been
probably
talking
help
about
with
that
that.
too.
Yeah.
And maybe getting another screen.
Yeah, I didn't print it out.
She was thinking a couple, 2 more people maybe.
What was that?
I guess.
So if we're gonna mount a projector,
Yeah,
I'm wondering if we get one where we can either aim it at the stage
So you can, okay.
right.
or aim it somewhere else, and like maybe the
Yeah.
project manager, the select board, use funds that are needed,
Yeah.
split the cost, which other people will use it.
Why?
We finally got those final results because
We were
they
willing to
really
put
do it, you know, like so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, yeah. We'd actually like to see the results. You know,
I don't think they would be brought up because we've been talking about it.
Okay.
At least I have. I would really like some more professional stuff that's select.
Yeah, well, I would, yes, and I would,
So, yeah, it was good with her, she
I
said,
would really.
you know what?
I sent you today.
Yes.
I don't think that's what I was talking about.
I feel like even
So I'm
though,
gonna try to figure out how to handle it. But I
and
think
you can take it easy, we don't have
a letter
to.
saying,
Do you know
when
when
you're ready,
Right.
let us know, we'll repost it, and we'll start up.
Okay, because then I can
But
use
it's
it
gonna
to
cost.
go and see Jeff
I don't know, like,
early.
Well,
Speaking of Theo,
so that's what it
this
is,
kid's
that's
not
what it is.
5 yet. This is such a grim.
Because I gotta tell her she's gotta pay for the newspaper ad again.
yeah. Okay, so,
He's riding a 2-wheeler.
I don't know if people are, because nobody's joined yet.
Okay, but so if somebody does,
It'll show up on the sidebar.
yeah, and then what do I have?
I said to Anna, his mother,
So
like
that,
she was almost
she was the one that was,
Right,
so the
Her
check
and
mark
Lindsay
right
Inman.
here.
Oh my God, we had them in our yard,
And the
like
X
falling
yeah.
down.
Okay.
And just ask them to mute
Yeah,
themselves.
so
when they come in.
it's gonna come in.
My daughter wouldn't listen to me, the
Talking
neighbors
during
were,
the
and she was teaching some of the other kids.
Is there anything else you got, questions?
Well, we lived in a dead end road. you know,
Oh, so that was perfect, yeah.
Well, until, and then it was
worst
up
case
to the
scenario
busy
is-
road, so my daughter says,
It
well,
doesn't
I'm
work.
ride, there's no place to go.
Correct.
And if you wanna wait,
Okay, so
have-
what you would like,
Yeah,
I
right,
usually
and
find
that
that
was it.
people.
Why,
That's
what's
why I'm
the
on
point?
YouTube right
Because all
now.
the kids just walking down the
People
hall.
can literally go to YouTube and start looking,
so why are we,
so they can ask questions. Because if they're in there, they can ask questions, if they're not, they can't start.
Yeah, no, I know, I've done that.
I try to accommodate as best as
Yeah, they're
possible.
pretty rigid, but most of the.
That's great.
Most of the
All
other
right.
recommendations.
I'll see you later, Marty.
okay,
Flexible.
thanks, Russ.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah.
With refreshments and chit chat. And somebody got up at like 4:15. It says, when you gonna start?
All right, you ever need to lock everything like that?
I do have a key, yeah.
Bring a chair.
So,
it's okay.
do you feel that he, like, when you,
And,
so you said you put it,
that genetic, yeah. Because it was like a fluky thing.
What is the line here?
Cover the
I mean, even though it's,
There are points of ledge that came up high enough that you couldn't ride over them.
or it burst and who knows what.
And his wisdom borrowed a drill from our friend who used to do foundation. And it's a special duty drill that we drill
I do.
And then he took a piece
I
of
did a,
No, I don't care. put it in the hole.
I just don't want to slide in.
So I just do that.
I did every rock.
I'm retired, so like time frames.
It sounds like
I left inside and just in case, but he just has a moment.
I'm just,
Well, you'd have to go
really.
anyhow. The whole point was, I couldn't go open them.
And you I actually sent
And, you know,
Leslie
it's that whole side of
because
the
I'm
house is
gonna
like,
take
there's a little bit on the driveway.
But it could have been.
Yeah, because I talked to her.
art features that they have
So I said, we need to, he said, well, it's gonna be rocks on,
people who retired
rocks on. I don't know.
Well, and then you have people
When he
that
first started drilling.
Yeah, she said,
get dark at
I
night.
figured he
It's
just
a challenge driving.
that time.
yeah, because I asked if they needed it. And she
So-
said no, between the girls.
I was
and-
He did it all
It was
last
even later.
But she said,
than
you know,
last
I'll talk to
night.
you before
I
this
why,
meeting.
that's, I noticed it, like,
Oh,
she's,
good.
she's
Something that
Yeah.
she
It's
says
been done a couple of weeks now.
and she's looking at
And
all
then
the
people
words. She's really,
Yeah,
We were,
that's what she's done.
oh, we were doing the bike trail.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out. I don't even know, how far, Ron, did you have to come?
Oh, Manchester, not too far. Not too
The
far.
other engineer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Ron's a master gardener with the University Extension Program, and I'm going to let him tell you about all his credentials, and
Yeah.
then we can all enjoy the program. But thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I get to beat my own chest here, but, so let's see. So I'm actually an advanced master gardener with UNH Extension, which means that I'm not only a master gardener, but I teach other master gardeners, or I teach other people to teach them to become master gardeners. I'm a immediate past president of the Hooksett Garden Club. I have been president, co-president of the Sandown Garden Club. I am on the executive board of the New Hampshire Federation of Garden Clubs. This is a garden club, right?
It's informal, just us.
Oh.
We're not affiliated with anybody.
Getting off the ground.
Getting off the ground.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when you all are ready to kind of get really going as a garden club, one of the advantages of belonging to the New Hampshire Federation of Garden Clubs is that you fall under a insurance umbrella. So like you do things like, well, open your meetings to the public, if you have events that are open to the public where someone could trip and fall and possibly sue you or your executive board, or if you have a plant sale or any fundraising activity, the New Hampshire Federation of Garden Clubs has an umbrella insurance program that's relatively inexpensive. We're actually really inexpensive because it falls on a huge umbrella. So it might be something to consider when you guys get to that point. So I'm going to stop the salesperson at this point. But yeah, if that's something that you get to that point, I would definitely encourage you to follow up with that. Also, as a UNH Extension volunteer, I have some brochures, little handout things here, which I'm going to get to at the end. So, feel free to stop and pick up one of these things at the end. So the topic tonight is putting the gardens to bed. And if you have any gardening questions at all, please feel free to raise your hand. Don't feel like you're going to be out of turn. I want to make sure you're here to learn something, and I'm here to impart the knowledge that I have to you. So I want to make sure that we connect on that point. So please don't feel embarrassed about asking a question. I guarantee you that the question that you have in your mind, someone else here or online that might be tuning in has that same question, and they'd be really happy if you would please just raise your hand and ask that question. So don't hold back. So here's some of the questions that we're going to answer tonight. Is that clear enough for you all? I didn't
Yep.
really check that. Focus on that. Let me just double check here. There we go. So these are the topics that we're going to cover tonight. Certainly, again, like I said, if you have any other questions, please chime in. So we're going to start with annuals. Annuals really need a lot, so they take a lot of energy out of the soil, but they give us a lot, right? Annuals are the flowers and vegetables that produce throughout the entire year. Many perennials, as you know, if you're longtime gardeners, you know that the perennials kind of have brief periods that they produce. Different perennials give us flowers in the spring, some in the summer, some in the fall, but their time frames are generally very short, whereas annuals really just give it to us throughout the entire year. So we want to make sure that as we're thinking about, or as we're coming into the fall, we want to think about making sure that we get our garden set up for success for next year. Even though the annuals are starting to wane out, we want to make sure that we get to that point. So obviously with vegetables, we're going to kind of start with vegetables a little bit. You want to harvest as much as possible before frost, knowing that in our very short growing season that we have in New Hampshire, we want to maximize that time that we have. Now there are some vegetables that actually don't mind a little bit of frost, right? So cabbages, kale, vegetables like that, actually kind of, they sweeten up a little bit when they get that first little nip of frost. But other vegetables like tomatoes, peppers are warm season crops. You know, they don't like any frost at all. As soon as that frost comes, they're pretty much done. But that doesn't mean that we're done. We can kind of extend that short season that we have in New Hampshire by doing a couple of things. So keeping an eye on the calendar, and I know that we've had some really warm weather, so we're really, you know, not really thinking much about winter, but it's coming, right? So let's be aware of that. And you can get a sudden drop in temperature, right? So keeping an eye on the calendar, and what I do is when the temperature gets kind of down to the mid 30s, maybe 36, 37 degrees, I'm not really going to wait for it to actually get to a frost point. I'm going to start thinking about my vegetables that haven't fully produced, that are still ready to produce some stuff. So I'm going to take you know, some blankets or some row covers, and I'm going to drape that over those when I think it's going to get cold enough at night that the potential for frost is there. Now while the air, so the temperatures that we register, that's the air temperature, right? So the ground is still warm. There's still a lot of heat in that ground, even though the air temperatures might be cooling down. So we can capitalize on that warmth that's still in the ground by producing a tent or a blanket over those vegetables. And we want to do that. Now if we have to use plastic, like you have to use plastic or tarp or something like that, we want to make sure that the plastic isn't touching the plants, because any contact with the plants, with the leaves or anything, is going to transfer that cool temperatures. And then in the morning, we want to make sure that we pull all that back up again, because once the sun comes up and the air warms back up again, we don't want to create an environment that could produce potential pathogens. So we want to clear that out, take that covering off in the morning, and that kind of extends our season a little bit. Kind of creates like a mini greenhouse. Now, once the time gets to that point where we're beyond the point of salvaging any temperatures, and the frost just is too bad, it's too persistent. We're going to get to that point where the vegetables and the plants are really starting to die off. How many people compost? Wow, excellent. That's fantastic. Good to see that. So the rule of thumb is to not put any diseased or pathogen likely materials into your compost pile. And so you see on my thing there, I have that kind of a question mark. Don't compost diseased plants. Well, if you have the opportunity to attend my composting seminar, you'll see that I'm able to get my compost pile up into the red zone. And I can get in at that red zone for 3 to 5 days, and that is going to defeat any pathogens that are in the pile. It's also going to kill any weed seeds, but we'll talk about that another time. But as a general rule of thumb, if you aren't able to get your compost pile up into the higher temperatures, then you don't want to put those diseased plants into your compost pile. Just throw them off to the side somewhere, burn them, bag them, or whatever. Now, one alternative to that is to put those leaves into, say, a black plastic bag, a black trash bag, set it out in the driveway or out in the yard where it's gonna get hit by the sun. Let it sit there for 4 or 5 days so the temperature's gonna rise within that bag, and that'll also do a good job of killing that. And then you can put it in your compost pile. Obviously, it's a good time of the year to kind of get those last final weeds and any debris that might be in there. For tilling, if you're going to till in any of your stuff into the soil, I strongly recommend that you do a light tilling. I'm going to get into that just a little bit, but a power tiller, the problem with power tillers, how many people use a power tiller in the garden? All right, well then I won't go there.
Oh, no, would you, because we used to, and we were wondering, I mean, we've heard we shouldn't.
Shouldn't, yes.
And then, but I wasn't clear on why.
On why, all right,
So
excellent.
as we were putting the
Yep.
garden to bed, I thought, should we get someone to do it?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really great point that I do want to talk about. And if you think about the action of that power tiller, right? So it's thrashing away at your soil, and it's churning everything at the top of the soil, which is a good point. But the bad point of that is if you think about what those blades look like and the action that it's doing, at the bottom of the throw of that tiller, it's actually creating a hard pan. It's shutting off the holes that the earthworms have used to come up and grab the organic material and pull that down into the root zone. So if you have to use a power tiller, and a lot of times, like let's say you're going to start a new garden bed in an area that's like grass or like hard debris, and you need to use a power tiller to turn that soil over. Just go through later with a pitchfork or a broad fork and re-poke holes back into that hard pan. And that allows the macroorganisms and the earthworms that have had that opportunity to come up into the top of the soil and pull those nutrients back down into the root zone. That gives them that opportunity to do that. So, so that's the why that you shouldn't power till, but then there's the how you overcome that when you have to. It's also a good time to add compost into your soil. So for those of you that do compost, this is a good time to add that in. Also, if you're going to add lime or manure into your soil, how many put manure into their garden beds in the fall? So, so fall is the time to do that, and the reason why we want to do that in the fall as opposed to the spring is that there are pathogens in manure, and we want to make sure that we give those pathogens time to break down, and no longer, especially in our vegetable beds, we want to make sure that those pathogens have had time to break down so that we're not transferring those pathogens into our dinner table. So this chart here kind of shows you the, I don't want to say the good manures and the bad manures, let's say the better manures and the not as good manures, right? So if you take a look here, you can see that horse manure still looks a little fuzzy. Let me see if I can sharpen it a little bit. There we go. You can see that horse manure, it takes 800 pounds of horse manure to provide 1 pound of nitrogen to your garden, right? Whereas opposed to poultry, like if you have chickens, how many people have chickens? All right, excellent. So chickens only takes about 170 to 300 pounds, so way less of manure from chickens to create that same amount of nitrogen. So you can see that manure, although a lot of people say, really, add manure to your compost, man, it's really good. Well, it really takes an awful lot of manure to do a lot of good. Now the reason why farmers use it is because they're doing vast pastures, right? So, and they're putting a lot of stuff out there. So it works great for farmers that are doing large areas, but for those of us in small garden spaces, manure, the value of some of the manures isn't as good as we might think that it is. So another thing that we can do, and probably the best thing that we can do to improve our soil, is to add a cover crop. So a cover crop is a plant that we would plant into our garden beds that provides nitrogen to the soil and also provides some other benefits. So it helps aerate the soil, it helps provide soil retention to the soil, it helps block out weeds. So there are a number of different types of cover crops, what we could call green manure, that we can add to our soil. So the first is the legumes, which is our legumes, I'm sorry, I don't know why I was mispronounced that, but you know, our beans and things like that, and they help fix nitrogen in our soil. Well, how do they do that? So at the root system, as those plants bring oxygen and chlorophyll in from the sun, at the root system, they create a type of nitrogen that's accessible to the rest of the plants that we put in there. So these particular ones are very good. Now, some other good cover crops are rapeseed and buckwheat, which again provide a good cover crop and do many things that they don't do the nitrogen fixing quite that the legumes do. I don't know, again. I have a problem with that one. I do it all the time. It's killing me. And then we have our grasses, winter rye, and oats. So I'm going to talk a little bit about oats, but one of the things I like about oats, which is what I use, is that it's relatively inexpensive. Same oats that you would buy to feed horses or cows or whatever, so that you would get your feed store. It winter kills, so it does not last through the winter. It doesn't create the dense root mass that some of the other, like the winter wheat or winter rye does. And it has the other benefits of holding soil in place and keeping the soil aerated. Now, for every benefit, there's always some negative, right? So one of the downsides to putting a cover crop in is that, first of all, you have to do it about 10 to 12 weeks before frost. So we're right at the cusp of when we would want to start cover crops in. So you're not too late, but you want to get on those right away. But it does provide preferential nesting for cutworms, which anybody that grows vegetables knows that cutworms are a real problem, right? You have your fall armyworms and of course slugs. Now that doesn't mean that you don't want to put cover crops in, but you want to be aware of the fact that you have the potential for these pests that come in there. So I want to show you why I like oats and why I use oats. So here is my one of my garden beds, late in the season, growing. This is the tomato beds that I put in. What's one of the things that you kind of don't see there?
Weeds.
Weeds, right? Yeah, so you'll kind of see why I don't have weeds. I never have to deal with any weeds at all in my vegetable beds, ever. Not through the entire season. And you'll see kind of why I get into this. So I'm still harvesting. I don't want to rip all this out and put my cover crops in, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to. Let me show you why. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that landscape fabric, that weed fabric that I put in, and I only use weed fabric in my vegetable beds. In other words, it's only temporary. You never, ever, ever, ever want to use landscape fabric in a perennial bed or a bed where it's going to stay there permanently. And the reason for that is the fine root hairs in your trees and shrubs and the plants that are in that bed are eventually going to work their way into the fine little holes of that landscape fabric, and it's going to make it impossible to take that fabric out. So if you want to plant a new plant or redo the bed or whatever, oh my God, it's going to be a nightmare. So you never want to use landscape fabric as a permanent weed block. And I'm going to show you some alternatives later, but I just want you to be aware of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is rip that out. Now you see that underneath the landscape fabric I have newspaper. I'll take that out. That's going to expose the soil. And now you see this is where I have my soaker hoses. Now the best way to water, especially vegetables, is to water the roots, not the plant. How many people grow tomatoes? How many people have an issue with septoria leaf spot? Right. So that's the water splashing up onto the tomato plants, and of course it gets worse as the season goes on, continually works its way up. So if you can reduce, not eliminate, reduce the amount of splash up by getting that water at the roots, covered by the newspaper and covered by the landscape fabric, you're gonna reduce the amount of septoria, leaf spot, and other pathogens that you generally find with tomatoes. So I take that out, so I have the soil. Now I'm gonna put my oats down. And I'm gonna put the oats down pretty heavy. You get about a 60% germination rate with oats. So a little more than half. So you wanna put a pretty heavy coat of seeds down there. Now I could leave it like that, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some mulch on top of that. Now I use wood chips because I can get wood chips free. Anybody ever use chipdrop.com? So chipdrop.com is a free source of wood chips. Now, of course, you don't know what they've chipped, but as a general rule, the wood chips are pretty good. I've been using them for years. They're great. Occasionally, you get a couple of weird plants grow up through it, but you know you can deal with that. And you can use any kind of mulch. I use wood chips because I get the wood chips free. You could use grass clippings. You could use shredded leaves, shredded newspaper, anything as mulch. And the only reason why I'm putting this down, well, two reasons. One is to keep the birds from eating all the seeds, right? And then the other is to kind of maintain moisture, right? Mulching. Anytime we're mulching, what we're doing is we're keeping the soil moist. So then after a few days, we're gonna start seeing some sprouting. After about a week, it's gonna go crazy. Again, still harvesting. I still got green tomatoes. Haven't ripped out my tomato plants. I've got my, geez, I'm getting a brain fart here. What is the?
Marigolds?
Yeah, thank you. Which I put in my vegetable beds to pull the pollinators in. You know, they're going strong. A couple of weeks later, again, still got green tomatoes. I'm still harvesting. Still got tomatoes that are still growing, and it's going crazy. And then in the spring, because remember I said there's a winter kill with the oats. In the spring, it just dies back to nothing. You don't get that heavy rooted mass that you sometimes get with the wheat or the winter wheat or the winter rye. And so there's no tilling that I have to do. In the spring, I'm going to just till in the soil amendments that I'm going to normally put in the spring, but I don't have to do any real hard tilling because the oats die back real easy. Yes.
When you had the landscape fabric down,
Yeah.
did you have to cut it apart to remove it, or did you have a secret way so that you can use it next year?
No, I'm not going to use it next year. I'm gonna just cut it all apart. And the reason why is, so when I put the landscape fabric down, so in the spring, so let's think about the reverse order of kind of what I showed you there. So I'm going to amend my soil. I'm going to lay my soaker hoses down. I'm going to lay the newspaper down, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, so I'll deal with that right now. I'm going to lay the newspaper down. I'm going to put the landscape fabric down. And then where I'm going to put my plants in, right? So I'm going to take my bulb tool. I'm going to take and I'm going to cut a little X in the fabric where I'm going to put my seedling in. Before I do that, I'm going to feel with my fingers to make sure that I'm cutting through the soaker hoses that I put down. Right, that's my process that I use for watering, but I want to make sure I don't want to cut through it. So I'm gonna feel through, cut a little X in, pull the landscape fabric back, pull the newspaper back, pop a little thing. Or I also have, oh my God, this has been, when I'm doing a lot of them, this is so cool. New tool that I picked up, so use that to make my hole. I'm gonna put my seedling in the hole, fold everything back over, and then I'm good to go. So I don't really, again, I never pull a weed. I don't have any weeds in my vegetable beds all season long. Never deal with it. Yes?
Two questions.
Yeah.
One, if you're, is the landscape fabric enough to keep cutworms out? Or do you put cutworm collars?
Awesome question. Glad you asked that. So on the plants that are susceptible to plant worms, so my peppers, cucumbers, right? What I'm gonna do is I have some PVC, short sections of PVC pipe that I've cut. And I'm gonna put, after I've made that X, I'm gonna put that in, it's gonna go down about 1 inch and come up about 1 inch. And then I'm gonna plant my plant inside that. I probably use about a 2 or 3 inch PVC pipe, depending on what the plant is. And that gives enough room for the stem of the plant to grow without any restrictions, but it also keeps the cutworms from getting in and getting to the plant. So great question. Glad you asked that.
And my
And
second
PVC
question
is
is,
better than,
Hold on.
so, go ahead.
PVC is better than metal. I just have heard people using
PVC is
tin
cheap.
cans.
I'm an electrician. I got PVC. I got extra pieces of PVC pipe laying all over the place. So you could use cardboard, anything that, that'll hold for a while, because you only really need it the early part of the spring. Doesn't have to last all summer. So you could use, for a small plant, you could use pieces of toilet paper or paper towels or whatever, really, maybe a couple in there, and then, but metal, PVC, it really doesn't matter. You're just looking for something that goes down into the soil about 1 inch, comes up out of the soil about 1 inch, and it kind of just creates a barrier that the cutworms can't get over. Next question.
So you put the oats down and then you mulched on top, so so the oats, how thick is your mulch that the oats can grow through it?
All right, good question. So again, so did I go far enough? Yeah, right there. So the mulch is, maybe it's just enough to cover the seeds so that the birds don't eat all the seeds. I feed birds, right? So my birds are, I get all kinds of birds flying in and out of my yard, and I'm gonna give them a feast if I don't just put something over them. So the mulch, again, does two things. It hides the seed from the birds, so the birds don't really, they're still gonna be in there poking around, because that's what they do, right? And which is fine. I don't mind feeding the birds. I feed the birds, so I don't mind them, taking what I don't want them to take, but whatever. That's why I seed heavy. But the other thing it does is seeds need to stay moist in order to germinate, right? So if they're exposed to the sun and that top layer of soil just keeps drying out because the sun just bakes the top of the soil, then those seeds aren't going to germinate. So the mulch just kind of helps keep that soil moist to allow those seeds to germinate. So it doesn't have to be, we're not talking mulching like you would mulch a flower bed or shrubs or trees, right? We're just talking just a thin layer, just to hide the seed from the birds and just to keep it, keep the soil moist so they germinate. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Are all the cover crops you mentioned, will they all winter kill and you won't have
No.
to till?
No.
No, just the oats will.
Just
So if you
oats.
use something else like rye,
So,
might you have to do a little
yep.
digging up?
So winter rye and winter wheat. So there's two issues with those crops and some of the other crops that I mentioned that are kind of different than oats. Because oats winter kill, you don't have to deal with them in the spring, so you don't get new stuff growing up. So with rapeseed, buckwheat, winter rye, winter wheat, all of those really will come back again in the spring, right? So now you got to deal with those in addition to your plants that you're planting, which is not necessarily a bad thing, except for the fact that the winter, especially winter wheat and winter rye, they create a real dense root mass. So if you want to if you need to, and most of the times you do, right? Well, actually, you have to, because as I said before, your annuals, they take a lot of nutrients out of the soil. So you have to put those nutrients back in the soil. And so you have to till that in. So if you use, and I'm not saying, please don't, I'm not saying don't use winter wheat or winter rye or rapeseed. They're all good cover crops. I'm just saying why I use oats is that you don't have to till through that root mass in the spring like you do with those other cover crops. They're all good cover crops. They do the job.
So say you put rye or buckwheat down.
Yep.
Would you just do like a hand tilling or a light tilling, not use the big heavy duty ones?
Yes.
Just something to break it up.
Just something to break it up so that you can amend your soil, add in your nutrients that you want to add in the spring. We're going to talk about nutrients in a little bit. So that you can add in the nutrients that you want to add in. It's just more difficult with those because of that root mass. Yeah, so you only want to till the top 2 or 3 inches of the soil. Ever notice when you dig into your soil, you see these long white strands in the soil? Anybody notice what I'm talking about? So that's actinomycetes, and it's a fungus-like bacteria, but it's a good bacteria to have in the soil because it helps break down some of the really tough lignins that are in the soil from the old root masses that are in there, and also some of the compost that you might put in that didn't completely break down some of the tougher lignins that are in the compost that you might have put in there. So those are good, and you want those in there. Well, when you use a power tiller, you break those up. You defeat the benefit of having those in your soil. When you do a light till, like say with a surface tiller, right? Or this is my favorite, my hound dog, right? Which is real easy. It's a nice handle. I can jam that in. I can step on it and jam that in. And this does, and I can kind of. I don't necessarily have to go this way. In fact, usually when I use this tool, I kind of spin it this way. I'll kind of go down the row like this and turn the soil over. And I'm only hitting the top, 2 to 4 inches of the soil, so I'm not getting down into that zone where I'm breaking up some of that beneficial bacteria and fungi that are in the soil that I want to keep there. That makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so back to here. All right, so now, because we kind of touched on it, let's talk about soil, because this is, healthy soil is the crux of any successful gardening. I mean, whether you're talking vegetable gardening or flower gardening or trees or shrubs or anything that you're trying to grow, if you don't have good, healthy soil, you're going to have problems. And what's important, why a soil test is important, we're going to see this, is you need to know what you need to amend to the soil. So let's see what I'm talking about here. This is the great time of the year to do a soil test, and the reason for that is the lab's not as busy as it is in spring. In the spring, everybody's trying to get a soil test done. If you do it in the fall, even though it might take a while to get the results back, you're not going to amend the soil until the spring, but you want to get the data now so you know what to do in the spring once the soil has warmed up and you're ready to go. It's only about $20 for a normal standard analysis. So let's see what that looks like. So this is what you're going to get back. And I know it's a lot of numbers up there, so we're going to take a look at this. So there's a few areas that we're going to look at. So first is what we're analyzing, the macronutrients that we want to know about. It's going to tell us what the level is. It's going to tell us what the optimum range is, and then obviously where we fall within that range. And you can see that we've got some diversity there. It's also going to look at any lead that might be in the soil, because we certainly want to know that, especially if we're growing vegetables. right? We want to know if there's any lead in the soil. And then the organic matter. And the organic matter is important to know. Again, the organic matter is the amount of organisms that are in our soil, which again are important to a healthy soil. So let's take a look at what all these mean. So the first thing that we're going to check is the pH. So why is pH important? Well, the pH is important because every nutrient that a plant needs is available to that plant at different pH levels, right? So if we look here, these are some of our major ones. They're available kind of at this middle range. These micronutrients are available at a more acidic range, and molybdenum, which is also an important nutrient, a micronutrient, is available more at the alkaline range. But what you notice about this chart is there's a range right in this sweet spot here from about 6.2 to 7.2, where almost every nutrient, with the exception of iron, molybdenum, but pretty much every one of them is available to the plant. So that's where we want to be. We want to be in that sweet spot. So that 6.5 that we had, or 6.6 I guess, sorry, is right in the sweet spot. So we're good. So we don't have to adjust our pH. A lot of people lime their, how many people have lawns? That's it. Well, good. I'm glad. The fewer the lawns, the better. But a lot of people, you know, just force a habit. Lime. You gotta lime the lawn in the fall. Well, no, not necessarily. You only want to lime if you got a problem. You don't do it just because somebody said you're supposed to. So let's take a look at each of the macronutrients that we're measuring. So the first one we're going to measure is calcium. How many people grow tomatoes? How many people have ever suffered with blossom end rot? A few. All right. And we're told that the problem with the blossom end rot. Oh, well, all right, not just tomatoes, zucchini, squash. How about blossom end rot in any vegetable they grow, right?
This year.
So a lot of people were saying, wow, all right, that's a lack of calcium in your soil. You got to add calcium. You could put eggshells in your soil, right? No. Most of the time, the problem with calcium deficiency isn't actual lack of calcium in the soil. It's due to irregular watering patterns. In other words, you have rain or you water a lot, and then you go through a dry spell where you don't water a lot, and then you go through a spell where you water a lot. And it's that inconsistent watering pattern that causes the calcium deficiency. So you don't want to add calcium to soil unless a soil test tells you need to. And of course, in this particular sample, if I was having blossom end rot, which this is from a vegetable bed, well, certainly isn't because of lack of calcium. So adding calcium to soil ain't going to solve my problem, right? Nope, something else. All right, so why do we need calcium? Why do we measure that? Well, the reason why we measure calcium is just, yes.
Is cap facing related to blossom end rot?
What, I'm sorry?
Cap facing on a tomato?
No.
Okay.
No, that's, well, okay. So cat facing is generally again, a watering issue. And although cat facing doesn't, it doesn't make the tomato any less edible.
Right.
What it makes it is a poor showing in a store. So stores won't sell cat-facing tomatoes because people would look at that and say, ooh, there's something wrong with that tomato. No, there's nothing wrong with that tomato, absolutely nothing wrong at all. So so that's the whole thing about cat facing. It's just most of the stuff that people that grow for groceries put so much effort into making the perfect vegetable, right? Not just tomatoes, right? They got to make because we as humans have gotten to that point where we think that anything other than perfect is bad. Well, it's not. It tastes just as good, right? So those of us that grow our own tomatoes know that
Yeah, right.
cat facing, ooh, look at that, that's a cool looking thing, but it's still a good tomato, right? All right, so why we measure calcium, right, is kind of similar to us humans. Is it helps with cell structure. So with calcium, bones for humans, but for plants, cell structure. So for those stems to be nice and strong, so the plant doesn't flop over, that's why we want to measure calcium. Now, if we were low in calcium, what we want to do is add bone meal is one option. So bone meal. But one thing to notice about bone meal, although it does give us calcium, and if anybody plants bulbs or when you plant new plants, a lot of say put some bone meal in the hole, right? Which is good. Bone meal has some advantages. But for a calcium point, notice that it also adds phosphorus. And if we go back to our thing here, we see we're already really high in phosphorus. So bone meal might not be a good solution here, but a better solution is gypsum. So gypsum adds not only calcium, which we need, it also adds sulfur. And although, how many people are familiar with the NPK? Right, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, right? It's the three numbers that we look for when we're buying fertilizers. Sulfur it really is the fourth major. It's not on the bag, and we don't really measure it much, but sulfur has a lot of advantage to growing plants. So sulfur is a good thing to add. So if we have a calcium deficiency, gypsum is what we would rather add rather than bone meal. All right, the next thing on the list is magnesium. Magnesium is important because it regulates the uptake of nutrients. So a lot of times we see plants that are, the leaves are yellowing, kind of weak, not doing very well. And we think, oh, it's a nitrogen deficiency, or it's yellowing leaves, or it's overwatering, oh, it's underwatering, all right, okay, all kinds of things. Well, magnesium helps regulate the amount, the other nutrients that are coming into a plant. So a magnesium deficiency is most often the cause of plants that are weak and not doing well. It helps with photosynthesis, chlorophyll development. So stunted growth and yellowing leaves is often a magnesium deficiency. So if we had a magnesium deficiency, which we don't here, we're pretty good there, but if we did, what we would want to add is Epsom salts, which is magnesium sulfate. Now, we want to be careful about adding Epsom salts because it is a salt, so we only want to add Epsom salts if we know that we're low in magnesium. I see a lot of DIY, old wives' tales things about adding magnesium when you have these problems that I just mentioned. Well, okay, only if magnesium is low. All right, the next one we want to measure is potassium. So it's our third number, the NPK. So with 10, 10, 10 or 20, 20, 20, it's that third number. And in this particular sample, we're low, so we want to add potassium. And if we want to add potassium, let's talk about what potassium does first. So potassium helps with plant hardiness. It helps a plant fight off diseases. It helps with respiration and transpiration, which is the plant sweating, let's say. So certainly in a drought period, it's important for good potassium. So if we needed to add potassium, we would use potash, which you can see is the third number, is very high in this particular brand. And I just want to say, as a representative of UNH Extension, I do not advocate for any particular brand. The stuff that you see up here is just stuff that I use. It's my personal choices for what I use. I'm not advocating it as a representative of UNH. So in this particular one, I'm getting just potash. The next one is phosphorus, which is the middle number in the NPK. And in this one, you can see that potassium is, for phosphorus is very high. Well, phosphorus is actually very good, especially for flowering plants. Annuals in particular need a lot of phosphorus. It helps produce in flower production, bud production, producing fruit and seeds. So if phosphorus was low, which of course is not here, phosphate would do the job there, and then you can see that that middle number is a 45. So, let's go back to our chart here, and we can see that we are high. Well, let's look at the NPKs. Oh, what's one number we don't see up there, talking about NPK? Important nitrogen. Great. Yes, so nitrogen, we don't see nitrogen. Well, why don't we see nitrogen? Nitrogen is pretty important in the growth of a plant, right? Well, the reason why we don't see nitrogen up there is it's very unstable in a test sample. So by the time you dig your sample up, send it to the lab, gets to the lab, and they test it, the nitrogen, the numbers aren't gonna correlate, they're not gonna make sense. So we'll see that they, in the over decades of research, they understand that, and based on the other needs, they are able to tell you how much nitrogen that you need. So we'll see that in the recommendations. But yes, nitrogen you don't see up there. If you needed to add nitrogen, so if you had a plant that was yellowing, not stunted, not doing very well, your magnesium is fine, your other nutrients are fine, and you wanted to just add nitrogen, the way to do that would be blood meal. So blood meal gives you that first number, N, and you can see here it's a 1200, so you're only getting nitrogen into your sample. So again, let's look back at this, and so we're not getting the N, we don't have N, but we have the P and the K. And look at this, we got really low on the potassium, the K, right? We're at 60, we want to be, wow, up in the 170 to 280 range, right? And the phosphorus, the P, we're at 407. Oh my God, we only want to be at 30 to 50, right? So, you know, when garden centers, and I don't want to detract from what they recommend, they don't have this knowledge base that I'm giving to you. So they're going to advocate a 10-10-10 or a 20-20-20. This Osmo code is a 14-14-14. They're going to say, here's a general purpose fertilizer, right? Well, if they give you a general purpose fertilizer, what's going to happen? Okay, yeah, you're going to boost your potassium, but you're already out of the zone on the phosphorus. So you're going to help on one problem, but you're going to completely exacerbate another problem, right? So you're actually going to make things worse by adding just a general purpose fertilizer. So that's why it's important to know what your soil test, where your soil test stands, and you can target what you need to add rather than just throwing everything to the wind.
Do you recommend the little home test kits with the capsules that you take some soil
You know,
and add water to it?
I would say they'll kind of get you in the ballpark, right? So here's my recommendation on that. And I don't make any money working for UNH, so let's just get square there, right? So I would recommend spending the $20, getting a good base, right? But let's not do this every year. We don't have to do this every year. Let's figure out from a professional lab where we are, and then over the next couple of years, we can use those test kits to just see, are we heading in the right direction? Are we getting there? And then maybe third or maybe fourth year, depending on what those other tests say to us, then let's go ahead and do another professional analysis and see did we get there. So sure, those are fine, but I wouldn't use those as my base to really set me in the right direction. Okay. They'll help kind of keep me on track, but that's not where I want to start off. Yeah.
Every time I know I have to test my soil, and every time I go to do it, I'm like stop in my tracks, because I have my vegetables and flowers, cutting flowers, are all in raised beds, and there's 9 of them, and there's 16 by 4.
Okay.
And I can't spend $20
No.
times 9 every year.
And you don't need to, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a great thing. So these are my test results from one of my raised beds, and I have 4 raised beds that I grow my vegetables in, and I did the same thing, just because I wanted to know, so I did a separate test for each of my raised beds. And the differences between each of the beds was negligible. I could have just done one, right? So, and the reason why is because they kind of all came from the same soil source, right?
30 years ago.
Yeah, right, exactly. So what you want to do is, so for your, how many vegetable beds do you have?
Not, 6 vegetables.
6.
Three of
So what I would do is take my 6 vegetable beds, and I would take, 3 or 4 samples from each of the beds. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my little bulb thing, and I'm gonna go down, and for my vegetables, I wanna get down really about 6 inches. I wanna get that sample that's down about 6 inches. So I'm gonna dig down there in a bunch of different spots, and I'm just gonna take that bottom 2 or 3 inches that I pulled out of this plug. I'm gonna throw them in a bucket, stir that all up, dump it out onto a table. And I'll pick out any stones or twigs or any inorganic matter. And then I'm gonna take about a cup, enough to fit into a quart baggie, right? And I'm gonna set that aside. I'm gonna let it dry out. I don't want it wet, right? Because I don't want it to get moldy. I'm gonna let that dry out, and then I'm gonna seal that up. I'm gonna send it off to the lab, and that's gonna tell me how my vegetables do. I'm gonna do my vegetables different from my flowers, because the nutrients that I need for my vegetables is gonna be different from what I need for my flowers. It's gonna be different from what I need for my trees. If I'm doing my lawn, if I got problems with my lawn, I'm gonna go out in my lawn, take some samples, but now I'm only gonna go down about 2 to 4 inches, right? Because where's the roots? Where's the roots in the vegetables? Where's the roots in the lawn? They're different heights. So I'm gonna do separate samples, all my vegetables in one. And that's gonna give me a general feel. Yeah, could one bed be a little bit off from the other? Sure. But again, it's gonna be negligible. Now, if I've got a problem in a particular bed, right? And I got a particular bed that, man, I'm just having all kinds of problems growing whatever I'm trying to grow. Now, of course, we're rotating our crops, right? We're not growing the same thing year after year. So if I've got a particular bed that, I don't matter what I plant in there, I'm having troubles. Well, okay, now I'm gonna do that bed all by itself, because I wanna know what is going on in that bed. Something is off. I'm either too high in something, or I'm too low in something in that particular bed. But as a general rule, if everything is just kind of going okay, then it's okay to just kind of blend those all together.
Great.
Cool? Alright. Alright, so that's why we don't just throw a regular 10-10-10 or a 20-20-20, because we gotta know what's going on, or we're just gonna make things worse. So again, here's some general all-purpose that they generally just sell you at the big box stores or the garden centers. So now I'm going to get recommendations, right? So again, I was low here, I was high here. Didn't tell me what my nitrogen was, right? But here's what my recommendations say: uniformly broadcast 10-0-10, right? So 0 on that middle, because I'm already very high there, right? Per 1,000 square foot, and then add some 0-0-22, because again, I was low on that end number. So the recommendations are gonna nail you, put you right there where you need to be, and tell you what you gotta do. And then if I'm that far off, which obviously I was here, really, really low and really super high, I'm gonna do the recommendations, but I'm gonna go ahead and test them again next year. Generally wouldn't have to do that if things are looking good, might not, but because I'm so out of whack here, I'm gonna go ahead and test the next year and make sure that those recommendations got me on the right path. Are we good? We understand? I know I spent a lot of time on soil, but soil is so important. If your soil is off, it just can create all kinds of problems.
Are you supposed to do anything if it's very high?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's nothing you can do if it's very high other than to stop adding that particular nutrient, right? So, again, if I added a 10, 10, 10 or 20, I'm just adding to the problem. But if I know I got a problem, I know that's really high, then I just continue to build on the others, and eventually, over time, those plants will start to suck that nutrient out of the soil, and eventually, over time, that number will come down, as long as I don't keep adding to the problem. That was a great question. Yes?
If your general source of water is, in our case, the river that runs behind our house,
Okay.
should we test the water to know if that's why we have phosphorus that's like totally out of whack?
You know, that's a really good question. I'm not familiar with what water testing would do for you, but I
If your
would
water
certainly am
was
going to
high in
refer you.
phosphorus,
What's that?
I said if your water was high in phosphorus,
Well,
would-
yeah,
adding
absolutely,
it every time you water.
and really, the reason why phosphorus is such an issue, our soils are naturally on the high side of phosphorus. So if you are near a water body, river, pond, stream, doesn't matter what, lake, and there are regulations, like landscapers, are absolutely restricted from adding phosphorus to, there's huge regulations for how far away from the shoreline or water line that you have to be to add certain nutrients. But that's the problem, it's the phosphorus runoff into water bodies. So if you're near especially a stream or a river that's coming down from other people's properties that are high in phosphorus, and their runoff is pushing this extra phosphorus into water, and you're using that water to irrigate your property, yeah, you're getting excessive amounts of phosphorus into your property, and that's your problem. That's your source where that extra phosphorus is coming from. I'll be honest with you, I'm not familiar with a testing process. I'm sure there is one. I'm sure the state has one. So I would, again, at the end, I'm going to give you some numbers, and it's on these little handouts here. I would call the 800 number and ask them about water testing, how you would do that, and they can give you that answer.
it's very easy at the state of New Hampshire, the state lab's right in Concord.
Oh, well, yeah,
Like a minute
sure.
ago, but
There you
I
go.
just was curious because that's what I use.
Well, no, and that's why phosphorus is a problem in New Hampshire, is because the runoff into the lakes into the rivers and the streams that eventually dump into the lakes, it's creating huge algae blooms and impacting the fisheries, and yeah, it's a problem. It's a serious problem, not just in New Hampshire, but everywhere. But yeah, so knowing what those phosphorus levels are in your water source would be hugely important. It might tell you, you know what, you can't use that source for your irrigation because it's exacerbating the problem. Yeah. All right, so any burning questions on annuals and everything we've covered so far? All right, I know I'm running a little behind here, so let me kind of zip through this quickly. So, let's talk about your perennial beds. So, your perennials obviously are going to die back in the fall. So you're going to cut those down to the ground. It's a good idea to mark in the middle of your plant what was there, because we know birds like to drop some seeds in our gardens and plant stuff that we don't know what the heck that is. Is that a weed or is that a plant? So it's kind of good to know what's supposed to come up in your bed, so marking them is kind of important. Some plants leave a basal foliage. Scabiosa is one example, let's say, that leaves a basal foliage that stays there throughout the year. So just cut the upper stems and be careful not to damage the basal foliage. And it's a gradual process, right? So I'm kind of anal about my flower beds. I like them to look neat and clean, or at least at the time to do so. So, so here's an example of a hosta. In the fall, at this point right here,
Looks like mine.
I'm gonna make sure I get the right button here. Oh, I didn't went too far. I could just, I could take my, oops, wrong direction. I could take my,
There you go.
I could take these things and just cut that right to the ground, right? And, whoops, I did go, oh, there we go. There we go. So I just take that right out, and of course, you can see I had a little problem with slugs that year, but anybody have problem with slugs in their hostas? Sluggo? Oh, I started using that, man, that stuff works great. Forget about the wasting beer and putting it in a little cup.
Wasting.
Why waste good beer, right? I mean, come on. No, that Sluggo, little baits, Sluggo works great. So anyways, I could just snap that right to the ground, clean everything out, but plants are amazing. So they plants are the one thing on the planet that produces its own food, right? We have to, well, I mean, we manufacture, but we don't manufacture within our body. Plants produce their own food. So what happens in the fall, vascular system in the plant takes and absorbs the energy from the sun, absorbs it through the leaves, produces chlorophyll, which then sends down through the vascular system plant, down into the root system, and creates carbohydrates and storage that it now, carbohydrates and sugars that it now stores through the winter. And in the spring, that vascular system works the other direction, takes all that energy that's stored in the fall, produces new shoots, new flowers, new blooms, new leaves, and produces a new plant. It's an amazing process. So the longer we can keep the green foliage on a plant, the more energy, the more sugars, the more carbohydrates that plant stores down into the root system, the healthier and more likely that plant is going to survive the winter when we do that. So that's what I do. And so it might take, I might, over a course of 2 or 3 weeks. So here's a daylily bed, daylily and irises, same thing, mess. Some people use the permaculture, right? Anybody heard of permaculture? Well, permaculture says just let nature take its course. Which is great. I mean, I'm not advocating against permaculture. Some people love it and they go for it. And the thought process behind permaculture is when you leave things like that, you're providing a home for beneficial insects. Well, you're also providing a home for insects that you don't want, as well as pathogens. And that's where I fall in. That's the group I fall into. So what I want to do is, again, I like to kind of keep things neat and clean, so I'm going to go through and clean up that thing, but I'm going to rip everything out, and then maybe a couple weeks later, going to get more of it, so as time goes on, I'm just going to go through. So instead of just one day going out and cleaning everything up and cutting everything out of the ground, for me, it's a gradual process, leaving as much green as long as possible, again, providing more energy into the plant. Dividing perennials, right? So dividing perennials, a lot of people say, well, you can only divide perennials in the spring because it's a growth time. Well, kind of true. As long as you give enough time for that plant to recover, you can divide it in the fall, which you kind of really have more time to do stuff like that in the fall than you do in spring. So if you're going to divide some plants in the fall, there's 2 things that, well, let's think about it, right? So what are we doing? When we're taking a plant that has a crown, or a crown-based plant, like a hosta, let's say, and we chop down through the middle of that, right? We're performing surgery, major surgery. We're cutting down through the middle of a plant and exposing pieces of that plant to pathogens and insects that it never had to deal with before. Well, if you go into surgery, there's 2 things that you wouldn't want your surgeon to do that we kind of do with these plants, right? Number 1, you wouldn't want your surgeon to use a dull scalpel, right? you'll still heal, right? But, you know, when he cuts into you and shreds your skin and your organs or whatever, it's gonna take longer for that plant to heal. And the second thing you wouldn't want the surgeon to do is take the scalpel that he used on the patient before you and use it on you without cleaning it first, right? So let's think about that. That's what we do when we divide plants. We take our shovel, we jam down through one plant, and then we jam down through another, and whatever. So I'm not saying you're killing those plants, because obviously you've done it before, they've survived. But if we want to give that plant the best chance for success, especially if we're dividing more later in the spring, or later in the fall, and even if we're doing it in the spring, we want a nice sharp utensil, nice clean cut, and we want to make sure they're not transferring pathogens from one plant that's accommodated to it, it's used to it, has survived it, to another plant. So let's see how we do that. So the first thing we do is we take our shovel and we want to put a nice sharp edge on it. So we're going to use, I use a 10-inch bastard file. I'm not mad at it, this is what it's called, the cut is called a bastard cut. So we're going to take our bastard cut file, get this as close as I can to the edge so you all can see. And I'm going to sharpen this down. I'm going to do it at a 22.5 degree angle. All right, you say, okay, Ron, I know you said you were anal, but 22.5 degrees, I mean, come on, dude, right? Okay. 90, 45, 22.5. So we want to be at about a 22.5 degree angle. So I'm going to do that on the ground.
Use my angle plan first.
I'm going to step on it right there. Come down. I'm going to put a nice sharp edge on that shovel. So now I got a nice clean edge. I'm going to create as little damage as possible to that plant. All right, well, we also want to make sure that we're not transferring any pathogens that one plant might have and have been used to the other. So I'm going to take isopropyl alcohol. Now, isopropyl alcohol is the same thing in the hand sanitizer that we've been using for the last 2 years to keep ourselves from dying from COVID, right? Works just as well. Works better than bleach because it's faster. Bleach takes about 20 minutes to react. Isopropyl alcohol, as we know, if we use it on our hands, is great. So I'm just going to give it a good spray. And I'm going to do that. Now, if I'm working in a bed, let's say of hostas, I don't necessarily have to spray down between every hosta plant because they're all in a big group. But if I'm going to do some hostas and then I'm going to go over and do some other plants, that's when I want to make sure that I clean and disinfect that shovel or whatever tool I'm going to use before I move on to the next group of plants. Does that make sense? Again, the plant will survive. I'm sure you've divided without doing that, right? But you give that plant a much better chance of surviving and improving in its new home without going through that. All right, so some other things now, grasses, we might not cut those down because they had a nice winter effect. When the snow gets on there, it kind of looks beautiful out in the yard, right? So we might kind of leave those. Some plants that provide nesting. So any hollow stem plants like daylilies or some in the mint family that have hollow stems, right? So when we cut those down, instead of putting those in a compost pile, we might leave those off to the side, kind of stack those up. And those hollow stems will provide nesting sites for some of our mason bees. Our native bees. And then in the spring, when do we put those in a compost pile? Well, we want to wait until the temperatures have been at least 50 degrees, having fallen below 50 degrees for 3 days in a row. Once it's maintained that 50-degree temperature, then those eggs have hatched, the bees are out and foraging, and then you can go ahead and put those in your compost pile. And then, of course, you have plants that have seed heads, coneflower, echinacea, bee balm. Different plants that have some nice seed heads, you might leave, you don't necessarily have to leave all of them up, you can kind of cut some, but leave some of the seed heads there for the birds to feed on through the winter. So that cleanup process, again, is kind of, think about that. And then weeds, right? We kind of talked about that a little bit. Who loves getting out there and weeding the garden? Yeah, I didn't see a lot of hands go up on that. Yeah, so in my beds, I mean, I've got maple trees. You get the little helicopters float down, and of course they fall in the mulch, and you get some sprouts that grow up. But they pull out real easy. I don't mind that. It's very relaxing for me to get out in the garden and just kind of pick away at those little seedlings that have kind of landed into the mulch. That I don't mind. But those hardcore perennial weeds, right? Quackgrass. Crabgrass, some of those are just brutal, right? And they get into our garden beds, and man, I'll tell you, I have plantain. Oh my God,
Yeah.
right? So they all say, what's the definition of weed? Well, the definition of weed is a plant that grows where you don't want it to grow. That's kind of the general definition, right? Because I mean, my lawn, I've got dandelions all through my lawn. And I don't mind it because they're a great nectar source for the bees early in the spring, right? So I'm good. I don't have a golf course. I'm up for nature, the bees and whatnot. The plantain on the hand drives me freaking nuts.
But you can eat that, so
Huh?
you can eat that, so.
You
if
can.
yes,
Plantain
yeah.
is an edible
Right.
plant. Absolutely.
So
There are a lot of
if
weeds.
you were
There are. You're
starving-
right. There are a lot of weeds that are actually edible and produce teas and whatnot. Absolutely.
Doomsday prepper, you're good.
But you only need so much plantain
Right.
to feed yourself, right? And the whole neighborhood, right? And you get to a certain point where, all right, I'm done with the plantain. Plantain, by the way, is generally an indication of compacted soil, just so you know. And most weeds are indicators. They indicate certain problems with your soil.
Wicked clay soil.
Yeah. So yeah, those weeds drive me nuts. And this year with the drought, oh my God, the weeds just went absolutely berserk, right? Anybody else have to see that same thing? Yeah. Your plants were struggling, but the weeds were just going crazy. Like, wow, this is good stuff. Yeah. I don't know what the heck's going on there. But anyway, so how do we deal with that, right? So when weeds are out of control, one solution is to put some heavy black plastic down, something that's a total light block. Put it over the area, leave it there for a couple of weeks, kill the weeds, peel it back, let the weeds sprout again, because there's still going to be a lot of, remember I said that energy that goes down into that root and into the root system. There's still a lot of energy down there. When you kill the foliage, you haven't killed the plant, right? So let them grow back up again and then put it down. And then just to again touch on that a little bit. So how many people use an herbicide? And again, I'm not going to get into the argument of chemical herbicide versus a home herbicide like Epsom salts and vinegar and dish detergent for dispersant. So whatever you use for an herbicide, I don't care, doesn't matter. And you notice that you spray it on there, a few months later, son of a gun, plant's going right back up again, right? Well, again, remember what I talked about before, about that vascular system of the plant. It's an amazing structure in the plant. So in the fall, remember, it's taking energy from the sun, pulling that energy down into its root system, storing it so that it can come back again in spring, whether it's weed or a good plant. Process is the same. So in the spring, when you spray an herbicide on a plant, you're just killing the foliage because there's still all that energy in the root system coming right back up and comes back up again. After flowering, any perennial, weed or non-weed, doesn't matter, either one, same thing. After flowering, the process goes the other direction. Again, taking that energy through the leaf system, sending it down the root. So when you apply an herbicide, chemical or natural, to the foliage in the fall, after flowering, you're sending that poison down into the root system. You got a better chance of killing Japanese knotweed, Oriental bittersweet, any of that stuff that just is brutal, that you just can't get rid of, quackgrass, all that stuff. You send that poison down into the root system, you get a better chance of killing the plant when you apply that herbicide in the fall. Now, weeds are smart. They know you're after them. I mean, seriously, they got brains. I swear to God they do, right? Because where do the weeds grow? They don't grow out in the open where you can easily spray that herbicide on there and take care of them, right? No, they grow right up through the middle of your plant, so right beside the plant, right? I got a solution for that. All right. So I take my herbicide, put it in a little bucket, right? Again, don't care organic, non-organic, care what you use. And then I have my tongs of death.
Tongues of death.
Tongs of death, right? So now I dip this into my herbicide, and then I just clamp that onto the leaves of the plant that's right beside my good plant. I don't worry about overspray, don't worry about killing the good plant, and I'm able to deal with the plant that I'm
What's on
trying to
the
get rid
inside of your tongs of death? Is it sponges or something?
Yeah, so I took an old pair of salad tongs,
Yeah,
took an old pair of kitchen sponge,
okay,
zip tied it,
okay.
right? And
Okay,
then
I'm gonna make one.
Yeah.
y'all can come up and take a look at my, I get some good stuff up here, y'all. Take a look. How many people use a bucket to carry their tools around the garden? Yeah, me too. And every tool you want is in the bottom of the bucket, right?
Yeah.
Because you already use a lot of tools? Yeah, check out how I fix that problem.
Okay.
All right, so, moving along. All right, so here's a section, weeds have finally gotten out of control. I got some Asiatics here in the corner, got daylilies here, got stuff all going there. So, I dug out the weeds. Of course, the Asiatics had already died out by this time. Put some newspaper down, and I left the space for the Asiatics to come back, left the space for the daylilies to come back, and papered all that. Now, I don't worry about newsprint. I don't worry about colored paper.
Oh, good.
Reason why? They no longer use toxic inks. They use vegetable dyes in newsprint. All right. Now I don't use glossy paper, so you know what I mean, the flyers and stuff that have the glossy. I don't use a glossy paper. I use regular newsprint, right? And I'm one of those people that still get the paper. I like doing the Sudoku and the jumble and the crosswords. I like doing it in pen. That's just me again, anal, right? So I still get. So if you don't get if you're one of those people that's online, you know, find a friend that gets you a newspaper. I got plenty. All right, so cover that up. I put my mulch down here in this particular garden. Just use some bark mulch. And did I go too fast? No. Yeah. So here's another area here. This is my milkweed garden. Anybody grow milkweed? We need it for our monarchs. Thank you all. Appreciate it. So again, after a few years, you know, so this process works for about 3-4 years. You're gonna have to redo it. Just the newspaper finally rots out and the birds keep dropping their goddamn seeds. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to swear. They keep dropping those seeds into my flowers. Sons of guns. I mean, I feed them. Come on, you know. It's like, you know, go poop somewhere else. You know, I'm doing you a favor. You know, do me a favor. Come on, let's work together here.
Yeah, right.
All right. So again, dug that all out. Newspapered around. I got a rose bush here. I got
Forsythia?
No, that's,
something there. I got Joe Pye weed here. Got lupin here. So I do one section at a time. Again, put the mulch down, paper the other section. These are all my milkweed plants all in here. Mulched over it. So I'm done for the fall. Get everything set to come back in the spring. So you can see everything came up fine. The lupins are there. The Joe Pye's there. The roses there. Begins with a. It's the plant that everybody complains they don't get any.
that has the big blue flowers, some
Yeah.
hydrangea.
Hydrangea, thank you. You know, when you get old, you know, the brain
Yeah,
just.
go through
all of a
the
sudden-
alphabet.
Oh my God, I was working this morning and I needed to leave and I needed to call the manager to come out. And what the heck is his frickin' name? I know this guy for like 10 years. I could not remember his frickin' name. It was killing me. Alright, so this is early in the spring, no weeds, this is later in the spring, no weeds. Oh, wait a minute. So, this is like late August, there's not a weed in there, right? So this is a great solution, yes.
I planted milkweed at the end of my garden,
Uh-huh,
and it's headed all the way, it wants to go all the way down through.
Okay.
And be invasive.
alright, so there's a couple of kinds of milkweed, right? So this one here,
I have that
this
one.
is butterfly weed.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a.
Doesn't spread. This is swamp milkweed, right? Doesn't spread. Somewhere in here is common milkweed, that's got the big leaves and the real big pods.
And the white, the white.
That stuff spreads like crazy. So, solution, get that 6-inch edging,
I
plastic
think so,
edging.
Yeah.
Oh,
But that same thing, if you've got bee balm,
Yeah.
go back to sleep. Bee balm, mountain mint, anything in the mountain mint family, oregano, right? Any of those spreading plants, just put an edging in, and that keeps those rhizomes from zipping out and going where you don't want them to go.
Yeah.
All right, so non-hardy plants. So if you have plants that you want to overwinter, geranium, elephant ears, anything like that. First thing you want to do is check for disease and insect issues. So this is a geranium that I brought inside. I've got tons of geranium. I love geraniums. Just one example. Brought it inside. Got busy doing presentations for y'all. And then a couple weeks after I brought it inside, I went in and I'm like, what the heck happened here? Yeah, so the geranium budworm, I didn't realize that, there was no holes in any of the leaves, and of course I'd already clipped all the buds off, so I don't know where this guy was hiding, but man, I'll tell you, I had a flock of them in there somewhere. So you can see how impossible they are to see, right? And this is a small larvae in the ground. So yeah, they went crazy. So I spent probably the next month, all my geraniums, and actually they got on my callias, they got on other plants, because when I finally run out of the geraniums, every day, I was squashing, it was kind of fun, but, also kind of got tired with it. Seriously, I spent a month, and of course the plant came back. So, plants are pretty hard. They again, all the energy's stored down in that root system, they're gonna come back. So callias, so I used to just take cuttings off my callias and bring them inside, regrow them over the winter, and then put them back in the ground in the spring. But I finally got to the point where, man, that's an awful lot of work, and I'm get to the point where, again, so busy teaching you all that I don't have time to take care of my own garden. So what I did was I took all my callias, and I have this shaded garden here. I got lungwort, I got Japanese fern, got all kinds of stuff going in there. This shade garden, ajuga. And so what I do is I put them in pots, and then I just lift the whole pot right out of the ground. And then in the spring, just put the pot back in. And I don't have to deal with all that, cutting and regrowing, all that kind of stuff.
Do you have trouble with ants and earwigs getting inside the pots?
Diatomaceous earth.
Oh, sure.
Yep. Sprinkle that on the ground, on the pot, on the soil in the pot, and if I did bring any earwigs in, it's going to take care of that. Any soft-bodied insect's going to deal with those. Yeah.
What is it?
I have two,
That's good stuff.
actually
Just on top.
4 green
Not the whole
pepper,
top.
bell pepper plants that I've heard that you can overwinter them, and then the next year when you bring them out, you get an earlier crop and a bigger
Sure.
crop. I tried it last year, I wasn't successful. Is there like a hardening off period that I should let it go through, or?
Well, so for reinducing it outside, absolutely. The thing about overwintering, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but let's just go ahead and talk about it now. Going through the winter, any non-southern plant like a tomato, right, needs to go through a dormancy. It needs to
Right.
rest, right? But a pepper plant or a tomato plant, I mean, they have, you know, in the south, they have tomato plants with, you know, trunks this big that have, you know,
Really?
they go, oh yeah, year after year after year. So you have to kind of treat those a little differently. Now, they need the same environment over the course of the winter that they need in the summer, which we don't get up here, right? So you need a really warm room.
Okay.
It can't be just 60, 65 degrees.
Okay.
It's got to be, you know, 75, 80 degrees. It needs a lot of light, so it needs good direct light 12 hours a day, like more. And the reason why it needs more than what it would normally get in the day up here is because there's no bulb. Well, I mean, maybe there is for God knows what it would cost, but your traditional, say, fluorescent bulbs don't put out enough lumens, the intensity of lumens necessary for that plant to get what it would normally get outside in the sun. So you've got to like really overpower it for a longer period of time with light. It needs to be a lot warmer than it would, so it's really challenging. You know, think about it, your other plants don't want that amount of light. Your other plants that you're overwintering don't want that amount of heat in the room. So you've got to put them in a whole different environment than the other plants that you're overwintering. So you can do it, but remember, you need that intense light and that higher temperature maintained. You need to give them that summer
Like,
environment.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
All right. I'm just going to use a general term, bulbs, which applies to rhizomes, tubers, you know, corm, all style, right? So any plants like that, you can dig those up. So you want to cut off once that first hard frost has cut off the foliage. Go ahead and cut that to the ground. You want to dig around. You want to make sure you give enough space so you don't damage the bulb. Again, I'm just using the term bulb as generic. Rinse off all the dirt, cut off all the roots, and then take that plant. You can cut the babies off now, or I generally leave the babies on through the winter. And then you store that in, again, there's the diatomaceous earth for anybody I thought I heard somebody say, what is that? Diatomaceous earth is an organic, it's the dead bodies of coral, and so to us it just looks like dust, but it's hard, crusty thing that the soft bodies like slugs.
Cuts them.
What was the insect that you mentioned?
Earwigs.
Yeah, earwigs, sorry, again. Any soft bodied insect, when they crawl through that to get to the plant, it cuts through their their outer body and they bleed out. Fungicide, so again, just to kind of prevent any issues that might crop up. Put it in peat moss is a good storage medium. Don't have bulbs contact each other, so leave, you can put them in the same box, but make sure there's a space between them. Holes in the box so it gets aeration. You can hang it in a nylon stockings. Y'all, I don't get nylon stockings, but you all probably do. Whatever.
Called the
Yeah. So again, plants require dormancy. So this is a, oh my God, what is going on tonight? This is a,
I can't think of it.
right? Do we have it written down here?
Yeah, it's that
Geez.
vine thing there, right?
Yeah, it's begins with a M, right? Anyways, Mandeville. Thank you. Oh my God. I felt like I got a good night's rest last night. Anyways, yeah. So this is Mandeville. So that I brought inside. So when you bring a tropical plant in from outside, first, like I said before, check for any bugs that might be in there. But it still needs to rest, right? Because we don't have the same, like I was telling you with the peppers, you don't have the same level of light, the cooler temperature. So it needs to go into dormancy period. So you don't want to water as often. You really want to let the plant kind of dry out just a little bit. Certainly don't fertilize. Absolutely no fertilizing at all until maybe March when it's starting to go back into a growth cycle. And you can overwinter any tropical plant inside. Bulbs, obviously, this is a good time to put bulbs in. Now, you don't want to put bulbs in until the soil temperature drops below 50 degrees. If the soil temperature is still warm, that bulb's going to want to sprout. You don't want it to sprout. So wait till the temperature is cooling. And you can put bulbs in, I mean, really, any time. You know, even if you have to, like, there's a crust of frost on the ground that you have to maybe break through and put it in. You can plant bulbs, spring flowering bulbs, you can plant them as late as possible. Obviously, you know, following directions for height and sun requirements and all that kind of stuff. How many people have problems with rodents? Squirrels,
Oh.
chipmunks,
Yeah.
voles. Everybody know the difference between a vole and a mole? So, voles, V, vegetarians, eat plants. Roots. Moles, M, meat eater, carnivorous, eat earthworms and grubs. So if you've got a problem with something eating your plants, it's not a mole. So the old castor oil trick that you can use with moles won't work with voles. Now what I have found to be effective with voles, and if anybody's squeamish about it, what I use is peanut butter infused bait blocks. So the same bait blocks that you would use for, say, mice or rats. So peanut butter infused variety, get it from JT Eaton from Amazon. Works great. I bury it in the holes so my dog doesn't get at it. I don't want the possums to get it. I don't want the raccoons to get it. I don't want you know, any of the animals to get it. I only want the rats to get it, and that would include voles. But anyways, works great. But another alternative is when you're going to plant your bulbs in the ground, dig your hole, put down some hardware cloth. You can see what it looks like right there. Fold it up about 1 inch. Put your bulbs in, cover it with soil. Put another layer of hardware cloth down right on top of the bulbs, and then put the rest of your soil in. You want that hardware cloth right on top of the bulbs, so that as the shoot starts to come up out of the bulb, it finds that little hole in the hardware cloth and doesn't get damaged as it goes the rest of the way up through the soil and into the light. And if you're doing individual bulbs, you can just kind of make a little bag or box or whatever you want to call it in each bulb and just set the whole thing down the hole. If you're doing pots or containers, just put that on top throughout the winter, and then you can take it off once the plant starts growing in the spring. We do not prune. We do not prune in the fall. Now, you can prune off diseased material, dead material, that's fine, but any pruning of, you know, fruits or trees or whatever, wait till mid to late winter to do any pruning at all. Pruning does two things for a plant. Number one, it creates a wound. And we want that plant to focus its energy on storing carbohydrates and sugars in its plant system. Well, if that's to put some of that energy into sealing that wound, we're weakening the plant. The other thing pruning does is creates new growth. Well, we don't want new growth in the fall because that new growth might not survive through the winter. So we don't want to do any pruning in the fall. Scout for signs of pests and disease. Anybody know what this is? This is a magnolia tree.
Scale?
It's scale. Great job. So scale is an insect. A lot of people think it's a pathogen. Scale is an insect, so this is not one insect, this is a colony of insects. And they create a hard covering over that colony to prevent them from being eaten by predators or whatever. So the best time to deal with scale is when they're in that crawler stage before they get to this point here. Now, if you have a plant that is non-flowering or doesn't flower until late in the year, you could use a systemic like this. Again, not this particular brand, but this is one that I use that works really great.
For scale?
Keeping in mind that a systemic gets into the vascular system of the plant, it's going to get into any flowers and buds. So a flowering plant, or certainly a plant that flowers early in the spring, you wouldn't want to use a systemic because that's going to impact the bees. Let's see, so obviously we want to, if we have, again, the rodent problem, rabbits, voles, put hardwood cloth around the base of the tree. Running out of that over here. And you want to be above the snow line because again, they can get across the snow. For watering plants, so our evergreens, which is not just our conifers, right? Rhodies are an evergreen, right? Azaleas, right? So we want to make sure that any of our evergreen plants get a good base of water in the spring, I mean in the fall, so that they can carry it through to the spring. So one way to conserve water is, you know, when you run your sink or your shower to wait for the hot water to get there, put a bucket there. And then take that bucket and take that outside to water your shrubs. So this is an example of a rhodie in the spring. I mean, over the course of winter, you can see the leaves are really drooping because it, you know, over the course of winter, it continues to transpire. The wind continues to whisk moisture off the plant. And then of course in the spring it comes back. We want to protect from winter damage, so salt can be a problem, especially if you a driveway or by the side of the road. The plows or even your snow blower is going to push salt into the plants. So wrap that with burlap. You notice on the highway going up 89 or 93, you notice in the wintertime, especially towards the late part of the winter, a lot of the trees have that brown salt damage from this plows just blasting that salt out into the trees. So burlap is a good way to protect that. How many people had a problem a few years ago with the rhodies, and they just wow, what had to help the brown, the leaves went brown, right? So yeah, I had the same problem. So this is a rhodie that was next to my house, put a new porch on, so I moved it out into a new area, and this is what happened over the course of the winter. Yeah. I was pretty disappointed, but again, got all that energy still in that root system, right? So what I did the following fall was put some stakes, wrapped it in burlap. Now the burlap helps reduce the wind blowing across that plant, whisking that moisture away from the leaves, and the following spring came back real nice.
And did you fill in behind the burlap with leaves or something to mulch it, or is it just open inside there?
Just open inside. You're just slowing down that wind that's blowing across the yard, right? You're slowing it down so it kind of, instead of just blowing completely across that plant and whisking that moisture away, it's kind of blowing around the outside, but the plant still gets the sunlight so that it can still, you know, maintain and produce food for the plant. Any tree or woody stem plant that has thin bark, especially fruit trees, birch trees, things like that have a thin bark, will often get what we call sun scald, and it's a damage to the bark generally on the southwest side of the tree. What causes that is in midwinter you get warm days. When it kind of warms up for a few days in a row, the moisture inside the bark will thaw, and then when it cools down and goes to freezing again, then that moisture freezes, expands, and damages the bark. Two solutions to that. One is what's called tree wrap, which you can wrap around. You generally only have to do the bottom 3 or 4 feet of the trunk. Another solution, much less expensive solution, is to take white latex paint, cut it 50-50, so half paint, half water. Paint that on the bottom half of the tree. It doesn't hurt the tree at all, doesn't prevent it from growing, and it will eliminate the sun scald. Again, any plant that is exposed to wind, some sign of screening, don't necessarily have to wrap completely around you, but the predominant wind generally comes from the predominant direction in your yard, so just put some kind of screening up there. Rose bushes or anything like that, you can just take some netting, put a stake around there. How many people have hydrangeas, I remembered it this time, that just don't seem to bloom don't seem to bloom as much as they used to, right? Yeah. So, hydrangeas, there's obviously several different varieties, but there's some that bloom on new wood. There are some varieties that bloom on old wood, and there are some varieties that bloom on both. Well, the varieties that bloom on old wood aren't really set for our zone, even though we're a 5, AB or whatever you are, depending on where you are, and you have a microclimate in your own yard. They're really more of a higher zone, 6 or 7. Now they sell them as a zone 5 because the plant will live, won't necessarily die, but it won't bloom well. And the reason why is because the buds on the old wood can't survive the cold temperatures. How do we fix that? So again, oops, wrong button. So again, stakes in the ground, some netting or whatever around the outside, fill it full of leaves. Everybody's got plenty of leaves, they're free, got all kinds of that. Fill that in there, and then what you'll see is a lot more blooms because you're now protecting, you're lowering the frost, or lowering, improving the temperature, because you get the heat in the ground is coming up, and you're kind of giving a blanket to help it survive through the winter. So you're going to get much better blooming. This is a plant that I got maybe 1, maybe 2 blooms every year. Couldn't understand, well, what the heck is the matter with this plant? Well, then I learned, and then this is what I did, and now it's doing a lot better. Any cane plants, raspberry bushes, again, if they're subject to high winds, you can kind of bind them together. Again, don't prune. For your lawns, if you need to oversee your lawns, if you have a problem with chinch bugs, which are a foliage eating bug, use an endophyte enhanced grass. It's a fungus that makes the grass taste like crap, kind of like what castor oil does to the earthworms and the grubs. And again, soil sample, don't add lime unless the soil sample tells you to. Fall's a good time of the year to clean out bird boxes, make new ones, make bat houses. This is the time of year we have a little bit more time to do stuff. Cleaning tools. I didn't bring that in there. Okay. So, sharpen your tools, clean your tools. Again, isopropyl alcohol is more faster than bleach. Again, not that bleach is bad, but if you're going to use bleach to soak or clean your tools, your stakes, or whatever, you need to soak at least 20 minutes in order to kill any pathogens that might be in there. Good time of the year to tune up your weed whacker or stuff like that. Now, know what's going on. How many people would see this bug and squash the hell of it as soon as they saw it? Come on, reach your hand, you know you would. Huh? What?
It's ugly.
It's ugly. It's a bad bug, right?
I don't know.
We don't want that in our yard.
What is it?
It is the larva of a ladybug.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So,
I've done that.
make sure you know what's going on. And the best way to do that, if you have any questions, you have pictures, take the picture of the bug, send it to answers@unh.edu. You have an 800 number that you call with any questions that you have. Again, grab one of these things on the table here. It has all this information here. If you captured a bug and you want to know what it is, or you got a plant that's not doing well, you can by appointment now, because we're still in the COVID semi-restriction. It's not as bad as it used to be. At least we have people in the office now. But Rachel Massini, if anybody see WMER's Growing Green, or whatever it's called. Rachel Massini, that you see on there every now and again, she's in that office. Nate is in that office. Emma's moved off to another office, but at the Goffstown office, you can bring in a plant, you can bring in a bug, you can bring that in, ask questions, but again, that's by appointment only. So, what questions do you have that I didn't answer? Cool. Oh, cool, yes.
So I just throw buckwheat seeds around my garden,
Okay,
and I just let them come up.
sure.
And they just pull up very easy. They
Okay.
don't have any really roots. So but the thing is about them is they make lots of good blossoms.
Yes, buckwheat is
Bees.
awesome for pollinators, absolutely, yes,
Yeah.
yes, I forgot to mention
I
that.
mean, there's so
Thank you for bringing it
many
up.
bees
Yeah.
that go to them.
Yeah, they
Flowers.
tons of,
I mean, they're
tons
not
of flowers,
pretty, you
yeah.
know, growing around my garden, but
Yeah.
it really is good to bring in the bees.
Yeah, well, flies. Yeah, it sounds like you're spreading it out, so you're not getting a real dense population.
just all
So,
over.
yeah, so that works good, yeah. No, you're absolutely right, I did forget to mention that is a great pollinator source, absolutely great. Rapeseed's the same thing. All right, come on, get out of here. There was another hand that popped up, yeah.
What would, something took all our peaches. We had 2 full peach trees and then they were just gone.
Okay,
And I know we have deer out there and I moved a wildlife camera there, but the deer almost seem to nibble the
the lower stuff,
lower stuff
Yeah.
and the leaves.
yeah.
But, I mean, these
Yeah,
are really tall. I mean, I
Well,
can't even
obviously,
imagine
there
what could have done
are,
it.
there are pathogens, for every plant,
But
there's
the
a pathogen.
peaches were just gone.
Yeah,
They were.
yeah, the only thing that I can advise you there, so there is a form that you can send in, so similar to the soil testing that I showed you, there's another one for plant diseases and pathogens, that you can send in a leaf or a stem or something that at least shows some kind of indication of what's going on. And you can send that into UNH as well. There's a cost, again, it's relatively reasonable. And they can help identify what the issue is.
I mean, I think it was a
there.
critter.
Yeah.
Nothing, not if it's that tall. If it's that tall, it was something in the soil or something, something in the vascular system that got to the plant. I mean, nothing, if it,
Well, I mean, we have had porcupines
yeah,
in the
but porcupines
trees.
don't crawl, they don't climb trees. They don't climb, you know what I mean, they don't.
Ah,
Barbara Atkins had
Yeah.
a beer with her peaches.
Oh, really?
If you're losing peaches that are there one day and
yeah,
maybe within 2 nights,
yeah.
they're not raccoons.
Raccoon.
Oh, yeah,
I
could
never
be-
see
could be-
raccoon.
Especially when
I
they
never
get
see
close to
raccoon.
ripe, because then they have a fragrance. And even if
Yeah,
the
no,
raccoons
I-
have never discovered a peach before, that's gonna smell
They
good.
will. I just never see raccoons. We've had them in
dogs,
our
yeah.
life, but
No, you
we've,
gotta be out there
At
at
night.
10 or 11.
I have
at night.
cameras on them.
And nothing, you never saw, the camera never triggered?
I saw a porcupine making his way down the trunk one day, and I've seen the deer nibbling on the, I mean, the peaches were gone by the time I thought to move the camera
Sure.
off the
Deer
trails,
won't
but,
bother. Porcupine, maybe.
mm,
Raccoons for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, porcupines, they can get up a little bit, but they're not gonna get up tall into the
Right.
tree. But, yeah, he's right that raccoons, they've got a better shot at there, but, so, just like any, usually the best way to prevent something like that is exclusion, right? So, obviously, like in my garden, and I don't know how this would work around a tree, but I'm just saying to keep the critters out of my vegetable garden, right? So I have, netting around the outside, but then the top of the netting, I don't secure to the main frame. And so as something tries to crawl up and they get to the top of the netting, their weight pulls them out and away so that they can't climb up and over. For a tree,
I was thinking like a baffle or something.
anything that they can't, well, I mean, obviously, squirrels are gonna jump over everything, they're gonna get into it, right? So your squirrels, you can't prevent. But anything that's a climbing critter, just something that falls away, that as they start to crawl up it, they can't get over it. So you could stake that around a peach tree or around a group of peach trees, depending how close together they are. And that would prevent them from being able to climb up over. I mean, they're not gonna, porcupine's not gonna jump, or raccoon's not gonna jump, they've gotta be able to crawl. So anything that prevents them from being able to get up over the fencing would work. And, you know, hey, maybe you got some master race of raccoons out there that somehow.
I can't
Able to
believe
feed it,
I've never
yeah.
seen a getting on.
All right, any other questions?
I had a question, I'm
Yeah.
trying to get a micro, or mini white clover instead of a, you know, grass lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Is it best, it does grow tall enough that my husband likes to cut it, but I'm encouraging him to wait until after it flowers, is that, so
Yes.
it will seed itself?
It will, and actually, as long as your mower isn't set low, like maybe 3 to 4 inches, you'll chop off, but it'll still continue to flower. Like I mean, I have clover growing in my yard,
Yeah.
and nettle and dandelions, and like I say, I'm fine with
Yeah,
that
me too.
because
Mhm.
you know, the only thing that's really pervasive in my lawn that irritates me is the plantain.
Mine too.
But, the one thing I will say about the plantain is when everybody else's lawn is brown.
Right.
Yeah.
I
Still
got a
green.
lush green lawn.
Just don't look too close.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's lush.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I have birds, so, you know, I feed the birds. I don't wanna put anything in the yard that they, you know, they might pick up and would hurt them, so I don't,
I've had clover for about 2 seasons now,
yeah,
and we mow it all the time.
Yeah.
But we have the mower high.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So the top flowers go, but
Right.
there's
Right.
stuff blooming and that grows up too.
Right.
Okay.
That's
And that's regular, it's not the
You
micro.
have white Dutch?
I have I have like a mini
Yeah.
clover,
Yeah.
so it's a shorter
White.
variety of it, yeah.
I went for big.
Other white varieties get taller.
Right,
Some of the white.
right, no, mine's kinda short, but my husband is
it's
cutting it, and I
green.
said, I think you need to let it flower, go to seed, and drop, and that way next year, because this is a biennial,
I got it
Is
last
it?
year.
Clover's annual.
And the
Oh.
barn
Yeah.
is still-
Clover's annual.
you mean perennial?
Yeah, well, yeah, I meant,
Yeah.
I mean, it comes up every year.
Right,
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
okay,
There's
okay.
Melanotus alba, which gets real tall
Yeah.
depending upon, and it likes crummy soil,
Oh, I've got
dry,
crummy
sandy
soil.
places,
Yeah.
and that's a biennial.
Okay, all right,
First
so,
year doesn't amount to much, and then the second year it shoots up and has all these white blossoms,
Yeah, I have white clover and purple clover, and I mow,
I
I
love
mow,
red
I mow,
clover. I
you
think
know,
it's
every
beautiful.
week or whenever, I mean, when the grass needs to be mowed, I
Right.
mow. And
Okay.
it's still, it
All
keeps
right.
growing, it
Lots
keeps
of
flowering.
bees,
I'll let 'em
it's
know.
wonderful,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Any other questions?
yeah.
All right, well, thank you for
Thank
coming.
Thank you, Bonnie, that was great.
For any of you that were afraid to ask questions, with everybody sitting around you, I'm gonna be here for a while packing everything up, so please feel free to come up and hit me with any questions
If
you
you
might
need
have.
something to drink, there's some water on the back table here that Donna Kenny brought.
And this
There are
is
cookies under there.
Wow.
Word.
Water didn't get that.
There, oatmeal chocolate chip.
Oh, and feel free to come up and take a look at my bucket.
You know what?
My husband got me this bucket, I think it's for,
I covered it so
something, but
that.
it's got a
Yeah,
canvas
I've
thing
seen
that's
those.
all
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
great, it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
markers and scissors and
I
stuff.
tried one of those first, but the pockets are always closed up.
Yeah.
So you're always, and this one here, like, you just drop it right in.
No, but I was gonna
Yeah.
say, but then there's, you still got the inside that you know.
Well, there's a couple things inside, but most everything's on the
No, but
inside.
I'm not saying I've got that nice pocket,
Oh,
but in
well,
the middle,
but
I'm
the-
like at the bottom looking
Yeah,
for the,
right.
yeah, so, no, this is great, yeah, I gotta take
Yeah, he's
pictures.
got all that PVC
No,
stuff.
that was,
I know.
Yeah, well, it's cheap. PVC is cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, take one of those too.
Thank you so much.
Between this and rock
Me too.
That's great.
No, it's just, this is just super because it's 45. It's just a higher level of positive, that's all.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, as long as whatever number you're looking for is the only number on the bag. And then you know you're targeting that specific
Yeah, I think I
nutrient.
have everything.
I have this company too. Thank you so much. I learned so much.
Yeah, me too, that was great.
You wouldn't recommend necessarily putting out home.
yeah, no, I
I do.
Thank you.
I do. I'm just saying, understand. I'm just saying that, understand with bone meal, you're not targeting just the one specific thing.
I think it might have been.
Just understand with bone meal, you're not targeting just calcium, you're also adding some phosphorus. So if your phosphorus is high, then you want to be careful
My
about how much
husband and I
water.
took apart my oven door, because they took the glass in between.
I use, when I, anytime,
What a
anytime
nightmare,
I
so
plant a new
my
plant,
oven is
I
not
sprinkle bone meal
working
on.
right, and I
Bulb,
told her.
plant, whatever,
So I just
bone
got
meal,
that one, that's it, yeah.
Something else next.
fertilizers.
He's
Every time, any plant, any bulb.
But I couldn't stand it, I was trying to get in there.
I know, there was a cobweb in there, I'm like, how the hell does that
It's like, who
happen?
designs these things to make them so, you know,
It's impossible to do.
yeah, you know, all these, yeah, it's like, how does it get inside?
So we finally figured out, somebody had.
The only problem with bone meal,
before,
and probably
because
more so with blood
one
meal,
screw was totally different than what the
because
other.
it's so slow,
And, we didn't
you'll
put it in
often
the right
get
spot.
something.
So once we figured out, we moved it around, it's okay now, but it took us until today to figure it out. Yeah, yeah.
Bone meal, I think there's, raccoons in particular, with bone meal, they think there's an animal or something dead, they wanna try to get at it. So, if you're not getting that, or if you're not having that problem,
I'll just need someone to walk me through that, but.
My right leg is
Thank
really
you.
far.
Thank you.
And a week ago, we tried
There's somebody else who has some here, in the meeting here tomorrow. I'm just gonna leave everything as
Yeah.
I'll talk to Russ.
Bye, honey. I'll see you Sunday. Yeah, I'm working, yeah, tomorrow and, Friday, so, I'll see you Sunday. Thank you again.
you're welcome.
That was great.
Oh, yeah, see, that's the thing. See, I don't have the strength, and I also have the struggle. So I was in a brace for 2 weeks and bend the leg and everything all. So all the tendons, I mean, you got the quadriceps there, and
I thought you shut
those
that off.
tendons, and then tendons down
I thought you
here.
shut that off, is it still on? Oh,
No, the blue light was on.
Really whacked the knee,
I didn't hit it twice. You have to hit it twice.
I know.
discomfort in the
No,
joint.
don't hold it.
2 days in a row, I got it.
The guy thought there might be some synovial fluid issues. It's so swollen up, it's swollen all the way up there,
Lift their head up.
and all around there. This is still swollen. Compared to this knee, it's different. So,
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's the fixer, it's not the.
yeah, I put in
Oh, okay.
on this side.
Because the picture was coming from the computer, I couldn't see, I couldn't see whether it was, when I plugged in, it said painful down.
Yeah.
His shepherd, everything with the
That's
people.
explain all the swelling.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it here.
That's mine.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And,
I thought that you wanted,
no.
you wanted our equipment, I thought.
Just bring,
Well, I'm looking at it
That's it.
like,
Oh, okay.
yep, no, I always bring my own laptop, I mean, my own,
Oh, okay.
projector.
For the other stuff, way down.
That way I know, yes.
so the girls are in there fitting
Yes,
the brace.
indeed.
Yeah, I was thinking, this looked a little bit different than ours.
Yeah.
They get that on.
That's
Occurred to me to ask you, how would you feel about going under these muscles?
Do you have a question?
And I bet you'd get a lot of blood if you did that. And
Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah.
Throw it to them.
Yeah. Yes. They move around to different areas, yes. It's a good way to do it.
Well, that was great.
Say hi to them.
I appreciate it, thank you.
very good. No, so I've got all normal places where you take blood. Scar tissue.
The one thing I'm to ask you about.
Yeah.
I think everybody has some, right?
The value of the manure.
He did, but I'm gonna offer
Yeah.
him another one.
Horses.
Different
cows.
types, yeah.
Right, you
Yeah.
tell me about goats. I have
Don't
goats.
be afraid of what we
That's the chart I have, yeah, it's,
I'm
Oh,
kind of assuming that goats are fairly similar to cows. But I know they're slightly
I
different.
would say the goats is probably pretty good in there. That would be my guess. Huh? Oh, absolutely, that was a good cookie.
Good.
No, I already had one. I already had one.
All right.
6 or 7 years old, 5 years old.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Massive scotch.
That was terrific, Ron.
Good, what you doing?
This is our first year as a group.
Oh, okay. Well, like I said in the beginning, when you guys get to a point where you get a little more organized and know where you're at, reach out to me and I'll get you in contact with the Federation. Offers a lot of benefits, offers, educational opportunities and, just different presenters and, just a lot of things that, can help you grow.
I love this. This is one of my favorites.
Hey, carpenter guy. Did you get rid of these?
Oh, but I'll take it.
No.
Oh, all right. That'll be fine.
One of the fun things about having BritBox TV is Monty Don's Gardening World.
What's that?
Monty Don's Gardener's World.
Never heard of it.
It's on BritBox TV.
Oh,
It's an English series.
oh, okay.
Lindsay about it.
Yeah, I watched a guy, obviously I just got it off of YouTube. And I was watching this guy tell me how to plant wheat. And so I did, and the wheat was coming up really nicely, right?
Yeah.
And then one day Nancy says to me, "Oh, did you harvest the wheat?" No, and it had to have been birds because everything, it was just like everything just came right off the top. So it wasn't like it was deer,
Right.
Right.
That's not this side, it's next.
Are you?
I'm just gonna leave it here for us, because I can't go downstairs. Well, actually, I probably could, but I'm just gonna. And that's really the only thing that.
Ron opened up the window.
Same day.
Mine, Ron opened up the window.
Okay, well, yeah, we should close all the windows.
You over there, you over here. Sign language. Shall we put these away?
No, we don't have to. They got movie on Friday night.
Well, Friday night, of course, we have our comfortable
I was
shows.
wondering where they were.
They're all. In fact, I'm gonna just leave the screen down.
You've had a rough weekend. That's that brand new movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the movie that came out in June.
We were supposed to get home in time to take a nap because tonight we have, and we get it. We have an elderly friend in a rehab hospital, Laconia, that we have to visit.
And, it's getting passed around.
Yeah.
We talked to the strategy.
She's never married, 94.
That's nothing.
The second floor apartment.
I went to see my mother-in-law the other day for her 100th birthday.
Oh, that's amazing.
And she's still, she loses a little bit, like she would ask me the same thing that she'd ask me.
I just spent all day last week.
Wow.
And she's in Merrimack County Nursing Home.
Is she?
Yeah, she's only been there
94-year-old
Like 6
lady.
months or so before that, she wasn't new, she was
Finally,
perfect, self-sufficient. But she felt, you know. and-
That's always
Yeah,
it.
that's right.
That's
Yeah.
always.
That's what happened to our
Yeah.
friend Marge.
Right.
But she didn't get hurt enough to stay in the hospital, so she had to go to a rehab hospital. And we're lucky that they did that. She's completely bent over like this.
Oh.
And the whole day I
But
was in there.
she was an English teacher her whole life. So today's conversation is about dangling participles.
That's pretty
She
funny.
perked right up. She loves talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
school.
I love hearing about English.
Yeah, there is that.
That's my favorite subject.
Suppose maybe I could carry you. Guys,
Oh, to help that guy
you to carry.
carry a couple.
I might be able to carry one.
Are you still having treatment?
I'm sorry?
He's just decrepit.